it was said that we were more Negro and we had mixed with African. Well, not at that time did they say Africans, but they said we were more Negro than Indian. The misnomer here being the fact that Indians were always Negro in appearance. We always were said to have different textured hair, curly, dark skin, and the fact that Negras or Negroes were not even transported to Virginia in large numbers at all, not during the entire 400 years of slave trade and servitude. There weren't very many. As a matter of fact, everyone knows about the 16, 19, 20 Negras. Really, it was said Negras, which meant they were females, which meant they were probably good for farming because in our culture, the women did the farming, the men did the hunting. So they also had Spanish names, and they were actually stolen from a slave ship that was in Barbados that was Spanish. So, I mean, they weren't from Africa. So the fact that today they say they were from Africa is a blatant lie. And if you look in the old historic books, of which I have several, you will see that they were not African. Never was that word used. As a matter of fact, in the slave trade, they didn't use African. They would say specifically where they were from, just like people who are from the continent do today. They say, I'm from Nigeria, or I'm from, Liberia. They don't say, I'm from Africa. They would say, we got the slave from the Congo. We got the slave from Angola. They would say exactly where they got the slave from. If you look in old documents, that African terminology was very rarely used. And so, that being the case, and the fact that basically, the slave trade, as they said, was not as much as what they had tried to make us believe, that only less than 250 some slaves were actually transported to North America for the whole entire period of servitude. That would mean that only in some places, in some colonies, only 80 some slaves came for the 400 years of slavery. That's crazy. 80 slaves, that's like a couple of classrooms of kids. Think about that. Anyway, the Powhatan chiefdom disappeared. That's the other thing. All these different tribes, there were many tribes. Even within the Accomacs, there were sub-tribes. Well, the Powhatan chiefdom, if you go from 1607, when the settlers or Anglo immigrants first arrived, it disappeared. All these different tribes just boop, 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 boop came off the map from the 20-year period, okay? Yet, miraculously, the Negro population grew by hundreds and hundreds of thousands. How do you account for this sudden increase of Negroes and no accounting for the disappearance of the Indians? I mean, quite frankly, if the Indians were all disappeared from sickness, they would have been gone pretty immediately. It doesn't take long. Being a RN for 30 some years, I can tell you that if you're gonna die and you die of the horrible things that they died from, it wasn't like a long process. They died pretty quick. That would have been an initial thing, and then immunity would have been built up. People would have been okay. Wouldn't have been an issue. Blah blah blah. So the fact that you have all these Indians gone and all these Negroes all suddenly appearing, and the fact that the original people that explored the Americas, North America specifically, Virginia specifically, said that our people were chestnut brown to tawny. Did not mention our hair being straight at all, mention our eyes being jet black, mention our hair being mostly black, jet black, or black. Why would you not think that there were already Negro people there? Why would you not believe that the indigenous people of Virginia were Negro in appearance? Everything that is written says we were, and we were. Let me also talk about the fact that we had many bands just in the Eastern Shore. A lot of people equate the survivors or descendants of the Accomacs with this reservation that was made. This good old reservation was only 1,500 acres. And I know that sounds like a lot to people, but let me put it in perspective. Ensign Savage was a immigrant that was given to the Accomacs as a guide or a interpreter or someone to learn the culture. This young man was said to be given 500 to 500,000 acres as a gift from the king. Now, of course, the idea of giving land and someone owning land in totality was not a custom or a law of the people that were Accomac. We did not give away land. People did not own land. So this is a false statement and a false transaction, okay? But I won't get into that. However, the reality is that's the thing. One man given 5,000 acres as opposed to a whole nation or a whole tribe being given 1,500 acres. Let's be real. Our own major king, Debbie Devon, did not coincide with the chiefdom. So his sub-tribes, they were probably the same way, like-minded, independent thinkers, people that kind of made their own decision for their sub-tribe or their clan. The fact that this reservation was started did not mean that everybody just trekked to the reservation. No, we had several bands. As a matter of fact, I have books that actually outline many of those names and their chiefs' names. The Magathas, the Nassawatucks, the Matawamis band or sub-tribe. There were multiple clans within each band or sub-tribe too. Our different bands and clans are supported by many different documentation. There were many sub-tribes, many bands. As far as the most important text that I refer to is Ye Kingdom of Accomac. That was written in the 1811, but actually refers back to the early 1700s, 1600s. And there were other branches, many branches, but the ones that I stuck out in my mind were the ones that relate to my family, mainly the Magathas. Also, there were Matawamis, there were Nassawatucks. The Nassawatucks were at Elliot's Neck under King Tepeanpam. And then we had the Matawanos who were at Hunger's Neck, and they had their own king as well that was mentioned. So these would be our relatives that were right there on the Eastern Shore in their own little nest, in their own little communities, okay? Please believe everybody in their individual sub-tribes and bands did not necessarily join a reservation. That was probably started because it was a prison camp. I mean, the start of the reservation was actually coincides with the end of that major war that ended in 1632. Then you get a reservation in 1640. Hello, it was probably a slave imprisonment camp, which they took the prisoners of war and turned them into slaves, or got them together, divvied them out to people by auction or whatever, and that's most likely how that reservation started. Later, it was converted to lots that were allotted to people to say, get off of this good land and come over here and live now. And, that existed, that reservation, from 1640 until 1813 when they were pretty much disbanded and the Virginia Assembly removed our reservation. There were, and this was because there was a lot of pressure from the locals for land. They wanted the land. And so they got it. That being the case, let's be clear about this. The land was about profit. And the people were there not to be good Christians and help the Indians. They weren't there because they needed a good life of freedom. They wanted profit. The Virginia, if you look back to my information that I showed about the peninsula was at first a free land called, Accomac. You fast forward from 1607 to 1627, and you will see my picture that says Accomac Plantation. The entire peninsula was a plantation for profit, and greed. And let me tell you, when they came here and you look at the very old works, the old diaries, the old accounts, the old logs, they say they're looking for everything, every plant, every mineral They are looking for what they can make money for. They actually drew pictures, and that's why we have pictures of the people and pictures of the plant life and everything, because they were looking and sending back to their investors these pictures and this information. We can make money off of this for dye. We can make money for this because it's a good spice. We can make money off of the tobacco because it's fun. I mean, we can make money off the salt. They even had a plantation called Dale's Gift, in which they were boiling like 200 to 300 gallons of salt water to produce salt, and they were taken from a plantation to do so, and they worked like all day through the night doing that. It was a very dangerous occupation, and yes, it was all for profit. Everything about this new world was a profit. It wasn't, you know, love of freedom and justice for all. It was about profit for few. And the people that were taken here as indentured slaves, they were for profit too. So what I want to say is, this is the true tale of what began this country. This country was started on the generosity of a few, which led to the profit and the success of many. And the same people that made it possible for the success of this country had their land and their lives and their rights and their identity ripped away from them. And the ripping away of the true identity of the indigenous people is how this country began. Next time when I do another video, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how this successfully was done, how we were actually transformed as a people that were Indian to people who were not, how our lands were taken away, and how it was possible that we actually forgot. I also want to talk about, in the future, a little bit about Nat Turner. Also, I'd like to talk about African Americans and, you know, the African slave trade and what indigenous people actually did look like in another video. I'd also would like to talk about how, you know, what we ate, our lifestyle, some of our natural cures and the things practices that we had in a very light form. And also talk about indigenous farming. I like to share that, and indigenous pottery making in future videos. So I hope you like and subscribe. In addition, if there's anything you'd like to know about, if you have any questions, or if you need to correct me on something, please leave it in the comments and I'll be glad to address it in a future video. Thanks.